Story 1. Intrusive thoughts. Nearly everyone has thoughts about pushing the old lady onto the subway train, swerving into opposing traffic, or stabbing their loved one in the stomach while cooking dinner with them. Some folks, however, take these thoughts very seriously and believe that they might act them out. This is called thought-action fusion. Most of us are able to brush them off, though. Story 2. I have heard some variant of, "This is probably weird, but I feel if I am my true self around others, then they won't like me," more times than I can count. As I explore the formative situations leading to this belief alongside my clients, it definitely pulls at my heartstrings. Story 3. The number of people I see who feel like they should be grieving a certain way and are afraid that they must not have loved someone or must not have cared is significant. People grieve in all sorts of ways. The 5 stages of grief are nonsense. I was consulting with another clinician who was seeing a couple whose daughter had died. The wife was convinced that the husband must not have cared about her because he wasn't grieving out loud. In reality, while she had been going to support groups and outwardly expressing, he had been continuing to work in a garden that he and his daughter had kept when she was alive, using that time to process and grieve as he did. Both were perfectly fine ways of grieving. However, it is expected that one's grief is more than the other. They both ended up working it out, however, with him driving her and others to their weekly support group, and her attempting to work in the garden with him on the condition that they didn't talk. Really sweet. To that same extent, the number of people who are unaware of their own emotions and emotional process is astounding. So many people feel only angry or happy and worry something must be wrong with them otherwise. Normalizing feeling the whole range is just as important. Recognizing what we're feeling as well as what it feels like in our body when we're feeling is incredibly helpful for understanding how we process and feel. As a whole, how we treat emotions as a society is deeply flawed. Thanks for coming to my talk. Edit, gamut, not gambit. Story 4. I would say a common belief is that there is something innately and irreparably wrong with them that makes them unable to ever truly fit in. For many people, it is such a deeply ingrained belief that it can be extremely painful to acknowledge or express, regardless of the level of personal success in their lives. Story 5. 2 topics come up with regularity. When someone discloses to me that they were sexually abused as a child, and when someone is experiencing suicidal thoughts. Both are things I hear from clients every single day, so I don't find it weird at all. However, when I have someone in front of me who's talking about it for the first time, I know it's important to validate the fact that even though I might be talking about this for the 5th time that day, they have never talked about this ever and need gentle care to feel safe. Story 6. That they do not know what they enjoy doing. Often they have people in their life, including therapists, say, "Try to do something fun today," or ask, "What do you like to do when you have free time?" Many people I work with do not know what those are. Once I explain that I dislike these statements or questions because they assume people should know the answer, and that many people don't, I can watch as they relax, take a deep breath, and say something to the effect of, "Oh my, that's so good to hear. I have no idea what I like to do." That's part of the problem. More often than not, they feel like they should know and that everyone else their age has it figured out. They are embarrassed to say that they don't know when in fact not knowing is very common. I couldn't even try to count how many clients I've had this conversation with. Story 7. Unwanted intrusive thoughts are normal and do not mean you are a bad person. Yes, even intrusions of sexual, religious, or moral themes. By definition, these are thoughts that are unwanted because they go against your own values and highlight what you don't want to do. For example, a religious person having unwanted blasphemous images pop into their mind, or a new parent having unwanted sexual thoughts about their new baby. However normal these thoughts are, over 90% of the population. The moral nature of these thoughts means that often people experience a lot of shame and take many years before they first tell someone about them. The occurrence of these thoughts, images, or urges is normal. The best way to manage them is to accept that they are a normal, albeit unpleasant, brain process and a sign of the opposite of who you are, and are therefore very, very unlikely to ever do. Let the thought run its course in the background while you bring your attention back to something you can see, feel, hear, taste, or touch. I usually say something like, "Okay, mind. Thanks for that, mind. I'm going to get back to washing the dishes and the sound and sensation of the water while you ponder all the nasties. Carry on." I literally say it to myself with a slightly amused tone because I am always genuinely amused at all the wild stuff my brain can produce. Story 8. A common one in the time I was a therapist was simply, I don't know. You would be surprised how reluctant people are to admit that they do not know why they are feeling how they are. But that is exactly why you are or were sitting there with me so we can figure out why together. It always put me in mind of a line from America by Simon and Garfunkel. Kathy, I'm lost, I said, though I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching and I don't know why. Story 9. Psychologist here. Basically, anything having to do with sex. There's so much shame, sexual abuse, sexual fantasies and fetishes, erectile dysfunction, infidelity, becoming sexually assertive. I've been told that I have a good psychologist's face. I try not to have a strong reaction to normalize the discussion. With adolescents, they are extremely anxious to tell me if they've relapsed or aren't doing well. They cut one night or they were suicidal. They're having a lot of negative self-talk or panic attacks. They'll come in pretending everything is okay. It's usually in the last 10 to 15 minutes that they'll say something. They'll reveal that they worried they'd let me down, that I'd be disappointed in them. It usually turns into a discussion about policing other people's feelings and tolerating emotions. I explain that I care about their well-being and it's my job to monitor my emotions and reactions, not their role. Story 10. Clients become quite fearful of admitting that they were not successful since the last time they had a session. This could include not succeeding in using a coping skill that they are learning about or not being able to complete a homework assignment I gave them. Humans are not robots, and therapy is a lot of work. That being said, I do not expect people to be perfect as they start to work on themselves in a positive way. It takes time to really commit to change, especially in relation to trauma or conflicted views that an individual holds. I feel as if the client does not want to let me down as their therapist, but these failure events are just as important to talk about as successful moments. Story 11. That they don't like their family members, are angry and want to stop communication with their parents, etc. I work in a country which is more culturally collectivist, so not wanting anything to do with your parents makes you an outcast in the current cultural sense. We deal with this almost on a daily basis. There is deep and profound shame in this, and when we find that line of, oh, it might be that your parents are toxic to your mental well-being or trigger your trauma, many of my clients actually get visibly angry with me. Cultural psychology is so important because when I first moved here, I had my American and European perspective. Oh boy, did I need to adjust. I am in Ukraine. Story 12. Women often feel really ashamed when they tell me they are burnt out on being a parent or that they never want to have kids. I wish all of them knew how common this thought is. Story 13. Some of the most common ones have been visual or auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. I usually hear, I don't want to be put in the hospital, or I don't want you to think I'm crazy. Also, basically anything sexual. I'm not going to judge you for being into bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, or masochism, fetishes, and so on. Honestly, I've probably heard it before and I'm not here to judge you. The same goes for any non-consensual experiences, especially if we're working through trauma. Story 14. Psychologist in the United States. To name a few, compulsive masturbation, fears of being a pedophile or rapist. This is a common obsessive-compulsive disorder fear. Hoarding, sexual performance difficulties, history of sexual abuse or sexual assault. Unfortunately, it is very common. Drug use, amount of money spent on various things, having an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, going back to an abusive relationship or staying in an abusive relationship, grieving years and years after a loss, self-harm of all sorts, wanting to abandon their current lifestyle, for example, to have more sex, to escape responsibility or expectations, history of gang violence or crime, their sexuality or asexuality, gender identity, the impact of racism or racial trauma, paranoia, hallucinations, feeling uncomfortable in therapy, not believing in therapy, difficulty trusting a therapist, fear of psychiatric medication, fear of doctors in general. I was surprised to see suicidal ideation in others' responses. Most of my clients seem to talk very openly about suicidal thoughts and urges from the start of therapy, which I think is super healthy. I think that most of the people I've worked with had suicidal ideation, current or history. As weird as it may seem, I can't imagine what a life without any thoughts about suicide would even look like. At this point, I don't recall a time a patient said something in therapy and I was shocked or even thought, oh, that's new. And in my opinion, if you surprise your therapist, that is okay. I wonder if we asked Reddit, what are you afraid to tell anyone, even a therapist, because you think it is weird? How many people would see that they aren't that weird at all? Story 15. Hidden sexual dreams and fantasies about family members are more common than people think and often stay that way, not really interfering in the person's close relationships unless they allow it. Many things we dream or think are unconscious and involuntary, and the root of such things is often nonsensical. Story 16. I do a lot of trauma work. Many people who have experienced molestation or sexual assault feel ashamed and confused because their bodies responded. Having an erection, lubrication, or even an orgasm does not mean you wanted the sexual contact, and it is still assault. Clients often hold a lot of shame and confusion about this. They wonder if it means they wanted it or if there is something wrong with them. It is a tough thing to work through because of this. Assault is assault. Sometimes human bodies respond to sexual touch even when we don't want that touch. Wow, thanks for the awards and likes. I hope that anyone reading this who is struggling with feeling weird about their reactions to rape, assault, or unwanted touch feels reassured. I also hope you find a good therapist or a good friend to talk to about this. It is one part of your life story, but it isn't the story of you. You get to craft the narrative of your life. Maybe this is a chapter in that story, but it is not the whole thing. Trauma is a thing we experience. It doesn't get to define who we are. Story 17. Obsessive-compulsive disorder gets misunderstood a lot. It's not just having a clean house or liking things to be organized. Common intrusive thoughts can include violent thoughts of harming children and other loved ones, intrusive thoughts of molesting children, or fear of being a serial killer. My clients can feel a lot of shame when discussing these thoughts or worry I will hospitalize them. Here are a couple of quick resources for people who have or think they may have obsessive-compulsive disorder. International Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder Foundation website. The book Freedom from Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder by Jonathan Grayson. The YouTube channel OCD3. The app NOCD. Story 18. I work with a lot of anxiety and trauma clients. Whenever I ask if they would describe their experience as being anxious about being anxious, I often get a lot of, oh my God, yes. Anxiety has such a physical impact on the body. Heart pounding, trouble breathing, feeling faint or cold, tunnel vision, that we become aware of our body's reaction before we even notice the anxious thoughts triggering the reaction. Then we panic about why our bodies are reacting like this when we're not even aware of feeling threatened, and the anxiety compounds on itself. Anxiety is like an alarm system in our bodies to signal the presence of real or perceived danger. What would you do if your alarm was going off at your house? Check to see if there's a real threat by scanning your environment or situation to ground yourself in the present. Turn off the alarm by using breathing exercises, which help along with mindfulness techniques like body scans. Then, investigate what tripped the alarm by processing thoughts around the situation that feel like danger to you. It's also important to note that danger doesn't need to be a gun being pulled on you. Panicking during a presentation that could impact your job and threaten the way you pay your bills and afford your life can feel pretty dangerous if you think about it. I'm an anxious person myself, and I respond really well to learning and knowing more about an issue. If you're interested, look into polyvagal theory. It goes into great detail around the mind-body response when it comes to anxiety and trauma. Story 19. Being tired of being a mother. There's this social expectation of loving your children, and they should be the first priority in your life, but having a child is messy and really hard work. It is normal to just want to take a break once in a while from all that responsibility. Story 20. As someone in the substance abuse field, I know that it is difficult for clients to tell me they got high with a parent, but it is something I get told fairly regularly. It's kind of sad. Story 21. They haven't had sex with their partner in years and don't know how or if they will ever have sex with their partner again. There is so much shame around sex in the United States that a lot of people are scared to talk to their partner about their sexual needs. Time goes by, and suddenly they haven't had sex in 3, 5, or 10 years. It starts for a lot of people in their 40s and 50s. A lot of people falsely believe there is something wrong with their marriage because they fantasize about people other than their partner.